Hey there, this is Dallin Seeker with Dallin Seeker Codes, and welcome to episode 4 of Making a DAW in C#. I thought we'd go ahead and jump into probably the most important thing we're going to be covering, which is processing audio through sample manipulation. All right, for just some quick background here, audio is, of course, sound is in waves. This is a poorly drawn wave here, and the samples in digital audio are essentially going to be, points within the wave here. So a sample is going to be a point which is mapped out by the computer, which allows it to recreate as closely as possible depending on the sample rate, which is the samples per second, which is going to map out as closely as possible the wave that we have here. Yeah, and so on. So what we're going to be doing is getting the wave by recording audio, which we've already covered, and we're going to be accessing these individual samples, and this sample is going to, each sample is going to represent a value. So this may be 0.65 or something like that. We're going to be able to access these samples and then manipulate them in any way we want. But for now, we're just going to be covering how to actually access them. So in our last video, we created a new solution or project within Visual Studio, and we created a little application. If you remember, we covered creating an option to select a recording device and a playback device. So all that I've changed since the last episode is adding a play and record method, which we've covered in episodes 1 and 2, and I've gone ahead and linked those to the record and play buttons in the form. And I just have a file here, which is sent to the desktop and called demo.wave manually, and then I access that string once again here to go ahead and play that file. So in order to manipulate any samples, we're of course going to need the audio file. So let's go ahead, and we have our IO settings set up, so we can just close that, and let's go ahead and record something real quick. Hit stop. Let's go ahead and record something real quick. All right, so that's that demo has appeared on the desktop here. When we hit play, let's go ahead and record something real quick. It plays it back. So now let's go ahead and access the samples within the waveform here. All right, so back in the code here, we're going to want to actually go ahead and create a new class. So I'm just going to use add class, and this doesn't need to be a new form. This can just be a class. So class add. So we have this class here. All right, so I went ahead and renamed this class to sample access and added the usings for an audio up here. Be sure to do that. So this class is going to be implementing an interface called iSampleProvider. So if you remember in the first episode, I mentioned key class under the hood in NAudio was WaveStream. I didn't really go into it at all, but WaveStream inherits the read method from system.stream, and that actually uses an array of bytes for reading data. However, that's difficult to work with in the case of audio processing, so iSampleProvider uses that same read method, but it allows us to use floats. So we have a float array instead of a byte array, which makes this easy to work with and ideal for processing audio and effects. All right, so let's go ahead and implement this interface. So control period on my system, implement. All right, so we have this interface implemented here, and if any of this is confusing or overwhelming, it was to me as well. If you just follow along, we'll get to the point where the samples will be accessible in float value, and you can just ignore everything else basically for the time being. So first of all, we're going to want to create a private variable of type iSampleProvider, and let's name this source. So what's going to fulfill this type iSampleProvider? How is that going to help us? Well, if you see this audio file reader type here that we have, that our audio file that we've recorded is actually of that type, you can see that it implements iSampleProvider. So that will actually, this audio file will work declared as this source. So let's go ahead and create a constructor here. And when this class is constructed, we're going to want to go ahead and pass in a variable of type iSampleProvider. We can just call it a source as well, or underscore source. And then we can set the source to the source. So with this constructor here, we'll be able to get this audio file, construct this class, and go ahead and pass this audio file here that we recorded into this constructor, and then set this private variable as that source. So now we have the audio file in this class here. And let's go ahead and delete this not implemented exception and set up some brackets here. And let's actually go ahead and just get the source's wave format so that this new manipulated version of that audio file will have the same wave format. So pretty simple. And down here we have that read method, and notice we have the float buffer here. So this is where we are going to be manipulating the samples. This is where the meat and potatoes of this exists. All right, so you see this method is of type int, so we're going to want to create an int. We can name it samples to read and set it equal to our source's read method. All right, now we're going to want to create a for loop. So we're going to do for. There we go, it auto created. So we're going to be looping through samples to read. So we're going to be looping through every single sample and rereading it back into a new file. All right, so now you have access to the samples. So all you need to do is get this buffer here, which is the buffer of all of the audio data. In this case, we have it as a float array, so it's going to give you the samples. So just go ahead and buffer I, and then whatever you want to it. So we could set buffer I to 0. And of course, down here, we're going to want to return samples to read so that we can return it back and have it read. So this is essentially that individual sample that I was talking about. So like this sample here would be this buffer I at this point. Oh, and one quick thing to add, if this is prompting you to use buffer I plus offset, this is actually the safest way to do it, is to add offset in here, although offset is almost always 0. So just for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to be keeping it like this. All right, so this is working fine. However, we actually don't have a source passed into here yet, so let's go ahead and get this audio file passed into our sample access class here. All right, and doing that is actually very simple. So here in the play method, let's go ahead and make some space, and we're just going to want to construct our sample access class. And we can name this new processed file or something, and set it equal to new sample access, and just pass in the audio file. So now we're passing in, this is the file we're passing in, and it's going to be processed with whatever we have in here. And you're going to want to change this initialize down here in the wave out. Instead of it being the original audio file, you're going to want to pass in new processed file. All right, let's actually test this out first. So we have it set as new processed file that will be played. So let's go ahead and actually just change this back to audio file, so it's not going to be sent into our processor here. So I'm actually going to record a new one. I deleted it from the desktop. So let's hit record, record, record. Stop that, so let's listen back. So let's hit record, record, record. All right, perfect. So that has that file is recorded there. So let's go ahead and shut this down now, so we have that file saved on our desktop. And we can go ahead and change this to the new processed file. So now that exact same file is going to go through this sample manipulation here. So let's set every single sample to 0. So if you can guess what's going to happen if you have this waveform here and we set all of these samples to 0, there's going to be essentially nothing, maybe some noise, but pretty much silence. Let's open this up now. And if we hit play, there should be nothing happening. Yep. And if we go back to our class, and instead of setting it to 0, we just set it to itself, then this should go ahead and work normally. So let's hit record, record, record. Yeah, so as you can see, there are a lot of things you can do with this, infinite possibilities. We'll go ahead and cover some of those in the future. However, you can try and be creative and see what you can do with it. But we will cover some examples of how you can do this in the future. All right, so that pretty much covers it. This was kind of confusing, but again, just if you just need to copy everything down, and just this is the part you need to focus on. All right, thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd be happy to help you out. And I hope you have a wonderful day.